Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. This is Joel Levin. I'm the Executive Director of Plug-in America, and I'm very excited to welcome everybody to our webinar to release our 2023 EV Driver Survey. This is a survey that we've been doing for several years, and this is the latest iteration, and we're really excited to have you all here today. Next slide. So over the next hour, we are going to go over the survey itself, the overview of the methodology, the key takeaways from it, including vehicle satisfaction, motivating factors, people's response to charging networks, and then we'll do a question and answer at the end. Everybody is on mute because we have a large number of people on the Zoom today, which is great. So if you have questions, and hopefully you do, please submit them in the chat box, and we will try to cover all of them by the end. So the report itself is not yet up on the website. It's going to be posted later today, and you can find it at the Plug-in America website. It's at pluginamerica.org/survey. And a recording of this webinar will be up as well. So for anyone who missed it, they'll be able to pull it down from our website. So I want to thank especially our gold sponsor, EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. And we also had some silver sponsors who helped out with it, Edison Electric Institute, Excel Energy, and Electrify America. So thank you all very much for helping to make this research project possible. Next slide. So Pete O'Connor is the person who did the bulk of the work with pulling this together, and he's going to be doing the presentation today. On the phone, we also have Ingrid Malmgren, our policy director, who is going to be answering questions, and also Lindsay Perkins, our communications director. So I want to introduce you to Plug-in America. For those of you who don't know who we are, hopefully everyone is pretty well familiar with us. We are the National Association of Electric Vehicle Drivers, the national voice for consumer concerns around electric vehicles. And we are focused on accelerating the use of electric vehicles around the United States. We provide practical, objective information to consumers and dealers and policymakers around EVs through a variety of programs, including National Drive Electric Week, Drive Electric Earth Day, Plugstar.com, and a number of other programs as well. And our members really represent the world's deepest pool of expertise of EV drivers, policy experts, and technical advisors with years and years of experience and millions of electric miles driven. So with that, I want to hand the microphone over to Pete O'Connor, who will dive into the nuts and bolts on the survey. So Pete, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you. So we had this year, we had about over 4,000 responses to our survey. We fielded it from like the end of December through February of 2023. Most of the responses, as you see, were from our email list of our Plug-in America members, but a good number were from social media. Social media ad buys generated about a quarter of the responses. There's a wide range of vehicles represented in here. Not all respondents had EVs. Some were simply interested in EVs, and so they took our survey, but 3,319 people had EVs. We asked about the primary one they drove. Some households had more than one. This was the primary EV they drove to answer questions about the driving experience, the vehicle's performance, and so on. The most common by brands were Tesla, Chevy, Nissan, Ford, and BMW, Toyota, and other. As you can see, some comparisons to last year's survey. As a proportion, Tesla was down a bit, Chevy was up a bit. Ford had a pretty significant jump. It was in the other category last time around, less than 4%. This year jumped up to 8% of the survey. And this is not its first time in the EV space, being a real contender. Back in 2016, Ford had EVs and plug-in hybrids that outsold the Nissan Leaf. So it is not a new player in the market, but the Mustang Mach-E really put it back into the mix of manufacturers. By individual model, the most common one was the Tesla Model 3, and the Chevy Bolt, Tesla Model Y, the Nissan Leaf. These are, in many cases, people had EVs for a long time, so they're not just the most recent acquisitions. We have the new acquisitions, the Kia EV6, the Volkswagen ID4, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 were among those popular with the newest EV drivers. Those are kind of new entries to the market this year. 80% of respondents reported acquiring their EVs new, and 20% reported acquiring them used, and some number also made their own EVs. They did custom conversions in garages. That's a pretty small number, but we're always happy to have those pioneers. 23, we asked about e-bikes the first time this year. There were 23 respondents who just had e-bikes, but not four-wheeled EVs. Because the considerations of those vehicles are quite different, they didn't get the full spectrum of survey questions, but that's a future reference to decide if we want to expand our survey and ask more about how e-bikes are used in the future. We asked people for the first time how long they'd had an EV in their household. And there were a couple of people who reported having their first EV in 1974, 1975, 1976. I'm pretty sure those were, home garage projects. The median year of the first EV in the household, the median answer to that was 2018. The mode, the most common answer, was 2022. So we have longtime veterans and brand new EV drivers responding to our survey. And actually, there were a few 2023s because the survey was fielded into February of 2023. The early adopter profile does skew high income. This is not different from last year. EVs are about 6% of light-duty vehicle sales in 2022. It's still kind of a niche product in that regard. So as you would expect, early adopters do skew higher income. They do cost more upfront than other vehicles. And so it's, as do new vehicles overall skew higher income in the purchases. The intenders, those who are considering buying EV, do have higher representation among the lower income brackets. They also skew older. So it's possible some of these are retirees who may have the higher wealth assets to buy an EV, but don't have a lot of income. We don't have good data on that. We didn't ask about wealth, we just asked about income, which gives you these demographics here. The key takeaways of the survey is that EV drivers are very satisfied with their vehicles. 90% are likely or very likely to purchase an EV as the next vehicle, just as in 2022 survey. Most of them were very satisfied with finding the information they needed to buy or lease an EV, 82% compared to last year's 83%. The main information gaps people saw were on cold weather performance and real world range. They want to know how that EPA stated range compares to what they will get under their driving behavior. And cold weather performance varies a lot geographically, not as large an issue in much of California, where the EV market is most significant, but here in New England, where I am, it can make a really significant difference. The salesperson knowledge continues to be moderate, very much like last year's survey. 15% of EV owners said the salesperson knowledge was very high, and 37% said it was high or very high, high or better. Home charging is very prevalent. 94% have access to home charging. And in last year's survey, the question was a little bit different. 92% said home was the most frequent charging location. Level 1 charging also remains common. 20% of EV owners have only level 1 charging at home. And that's not just for plug-in hybrids and not just for smaller battery EVs. 18% of Bolt drivers and 10% of Model 3 drivers use only level 1. Last year, that was a bit higher, suggesting the new drivers are relying on level 2 more, or some of those old level 1 drivers have upgraded, but it's still significant amounts relying on level 1 charging. Public charging networks are lagging. Last year, 25% of those using the public networks consider broken chargers to be a major concern, or a deal breaker for using this network. This year, that 25% increased to 46%. So look at another way, the general satisfaction with public charging networks went from 75% in 2022 to 54% in 2023. If you're using letter grades, that's a C to an F. And this is not a metric of objective measured uptime. This is driver perception of this is good enough for me or this is not good enough for me. The supercharged network, Tesla supercharged network has much higher approval from its users, but even there, they saw some increase in dissatisfaction. I think that was largely due to newer drivers with higher expectations, rather than an increase in dissatisfaction when I separated out the year of acquisition of the vehicles. But for the public charging networks, it wasn't new drivers that didn't make any difference. It was the same dissatisfaction considering just the new drivers or the longer term drivers. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with the level of broken chargers overall, and that's across multiple different networks who had somewhat differing metrics in that regard. I'll get to that.
Hey,
The
Pete,
vehicles, yes.
we've had a couple requests for closed captioning, and I was hoping if you could just take a look in the meeting controls toolbar and see if there is a show captions option to see if we can enable that.
If you go under the video options for
It's under video.
accessibility,
Okay. Hold on.
the video settings,
Video settings. There we go.
accessibility,
Accessibility. I
is
will.
there a checkbox for
Yeah,
closed captioning?
there-
Always show.
There is a chat box for closed captioning. Can I turn it on? It says closed caption is available. Enable.
Yes.
It was enabled. Why am I not seeing it?
Okay.
Let me try a couple more things. Hold on.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Sorry, I haven't used this feature before. I hope it captures my words accurately enough.
While he's working on that, just a reminder that you can drop any questions that you have about the data that you're seeing, or maybe some data that you would like to see in the Q&A box. We will answer any questions at the end of the presentation and work to follow up with anyone if we have a question that we were not able to get to.
All right. Under my profile picture. Okay. I see Gary Berger's comments about closed captioning. It does not. I'm gonna try meeting info. Nope, does not seem to be here under my settings.
Okay, yes, and we're getting some comments saying that we might be able to enable that feature during playback and add it when we upload the recording of the webinar to YouTube. So we will do that. We apologize for not having closed captioning during this live webinar, but we will do our best to make it right for the recording.
And I'll do my best to speak clearly so that the caption is accurate. Vehicle satisfaction was very high. So this graph shows how across all EVs, drivers rated their vehicles on each of these metrics. What percentage unsatisfactory or satisfactory or exceptional. As you can see, people found EV's performance to be generally exceptional, as well as safety features, styling and appearance, ease of charging, reliability. Those are all very high. Very few things were unsatisfactory to any great degree. You might ask why we included a navigation system, and that's because that's how many EV drivers find charging stations. They do not have signs towering over the highway on 60-foot poles saying EV charging here, the way gas stations do, with neon lights telling you the price. That's not how you find EV chargers. You rely on an app either built into the car or on your phone. So I thought it was important to ask about the navigation system for that ease of charging. But in general, there's a lot of satisfactory and a fair amount of exceptional. And then we go into how that splits among the different models. So in each of these metrics, here's the leaders. We separated out because the Rivian had a very small number of responses, but very, very positive. So we weren't sure if it was a large enough sample size to include, but it was so exemplary that I thought it should at least be noted that Rivian drivers were considered exceptional to a very large degree on numerous metrics. If you only look at those that had a larger share of the market, 80 or more responses, we think the top 12 models, the Tesla Model Y is probably the overall best reviewed EV. And every model had things that people liked about it quite a bit. The Chevy Bolt, as you can see, was the leader in value for the price. The Toyota RAV4 Prime was among the leaders in reliability. And the Ioniq 5 was the leader in comfort. Charging speed, the EV6 really stood out there. So here's how different models ranked for being exceptional. And that's in the report in greater detail. You can delve into that. This year, we asked about the model year of the vehicle, reasoning that, for example, many Nissan Leafs in the survey would have been older vehicles, and therefore we don't want to have the Leaf only be skewed by the age of the vehicle. So we asked specifically about the satisfaction by model year. How do the EVs coming out over time impress their drivers? And some things generally tend to improve over time. Vehicle range, performance, and charging speed are most often seen as better with the more recent buys. And there are some spikes and valleys, but that's a general trend. The value for the price, the older EVs are definitely seen as strong contenders there. Newer ones, especially in 2022, were more expensive. There were definitely price hikes due to supply chain constraints. And so those were not as seen as successful on value for the price. Reliability is pretty constant. People look at all the EVs, regardless of model year, as pretty reliable. So this is an interesting observation. This is the percent exceptional for each year, I believe. Percent of vehicles rated exceptional for each model year. Why do people buy EVs? The number one reason is clean air and a livable climate. This is consistent with last year's survey. It's by far the most prevalent motivating factor. If they had to pick a single most important factor, that was most often clean air and environmental protection. Clean air and environmental protection. Cost savings were the second most prevalent factor at 20%. Among intenders, it was a much more significant one. So people looking to buy an EV are considering cost savings more strongly, but they are still primarily motivated by environmental protection. And coming off of this, a majority of EV drivers say it is either very important or vital that the electricity for the vehicle come from renewable energy. We have that chart in the report, but not here, but I think it's over 60% with that preference. Economic incentives do move the needle on EV adoption. Here's the incentives that are called very influential or critical by the buyers and by the intenders. Inexpensive home charging, the federal EV tax credit. Free charging at public locations was not as prevalent for EV owners, but higher expectation for the intenders. In general, most of these incentives were seen as more significant for the intenders. I'll add a note to that the federal EV tax credit would not have been available for some of the vehicles purchased last year, but will be this year due to the renewal of the tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. Tesla and GM vehicles will have access to the incentive this year that they didn't last year. So some buyers just didn't have access to the federal EV tax credit. We asked about information sources. This is a key role of Plug in America, providing information on electric vehicles. The most significant information source, we asked people for the top three, and most often EV-specific websites and forums came up. Plug in America fulfills that role. They're also a nonprofit organization, and they do ride and drive events. So many of the top 5 information sources, Plug in America is 3 of them. Video reviewers on sites such as YouTube were a very popular option. So and that could be an area to look into in the future. I'm doing more video reviews. That's not a way I ever bought a car, but I guess it's increasingly common these days to look for video reviews. The information
Hey,
gaps.
Pete,
Yes.
could we remind everyone what the definition of intender is? And
Oh,
what
yes.
you mean when you say that?
Oh, yes. Intenders are those who don't have an EV now, but said they were strongly considering it or likely to have their next car purchase be an EV, even though they don't have one right now. So many cases, these are people actively looking for information on EVs in different stages. And as you can see here, they haven't been as successful yet in finding all the information they need. The owners, those who actually went through with the decision to buy an EV, quite often said they were able to find all the information they needed. 40% said that. Some still had questions when they bought their EV. But only about 18% of intenders were able to find all the information they wanted, and they have much higher degrees of gaps to still looking at. So there's cold weather performance, reliable information, a real world vehicle range, and so on. Many of these Plug-in America has on its website. Available vehicle models and characteristics is a pretty significant gap for intenders. And I would suggest they look at the Plug-in America website and PlugStar, as well as many of the other elements there. Public charging options, how to apply for incentives, rebates, and so on. Cold weather performance, I will note, is an area where we need manufacturers to provide plenty of information. And it can vary a lot from what's reported on how you drive, how you use the heating, to use the seat warmers or the cabin heat. There's a lot of variation there, but we do need some good information from manufacturers on that, because it can drop quite a bit depending on your settings. We asked about charging patterns, how often people use public charging. We looked at DC fast chargers and public level 2 chargers. And although, a fair amount never, 20% or so never use these, everyone else uses them at least sometimes. Workplace charging is pretty heavily used by those who have access to it. We asked people, do you have access to workplace charging? And if so, how often do you use it? You see that when it's offered, it's commonly used. We think it's a good option, especially for those who don't have access to home charging and have a large enough vehicle battery to make it through, the weekends with only occasional public charging and relying on workplace charging most of the time. But the difficulties in public charging increased quite a bit, as we saw. So these graphs compare the 2022 satisfaction to 2023 satisfaction for both the Tesla Supercharging network and the other public networks taken together. Tesla is about 40% of the responses here and has a very different business model. And its results were so different that for those 3 reasons, we felt it reasonable to separate it out and look at it separately. On Tesla, nothing had more than 10% combined major concern and deal breaker rankings. On public chargers, many factors had that. So this is an area for improvement. Some concerns are more prevalent than others, but we can go into the specific networks. I guess that's in the report. I didn't add that chart here. But I think there is pretty similar findings among the different networks, like Tri-America, ChargePoint, EVgo, Blink. Some of them had fewer concerns about broken chargers and more concerns about charging locations being too far apart. But in general, they were all higher than the supercharged network on both metrics. And there really wasn't a huge difference between them. We can go into that in the report itself if you're curious. We did look into California-specific issues. California has a very high prevalence of EVs, so perhaps their concerns would differ. If there's a lot of EVs, you might expect that people have more of concern about there not being enough chargers at each location. And we didn't see that. And most of the survey, the rest of the survey as a whole, over a quarter of the people said there was no concern with crowded chargers, with too many, and not enough at each location, too many cars, not enough chargers. But in California, only 15% said that's not a problem. And it being a major concern, a moderate concern, a deal breaker, those are all higher for California. There's more of an issue with crowding at charging stations in California. There's less of a concern with not having enough chargers. So California has enough stations generally, but not enough chargers at each station compared to the rest of the country. We looked at the buying experience, dealership knowledge, satisfaction with negotiating price and terms, post-delivery support and service. And based on feedback we had heard, we did look into, is there a difference between the direct sales model and the dealership model in this? Do we see, less satisfaction from Tesla buyers on the post-delivery support and service? Well, salesperson knowledge overall, we talked about it earlier, but the model-specific satisfaction was quite high with Tesla drivers and Rivian and Lucid. That could be high satisfaction with the vehicles spilling over into their satisfaction with all parts of the experience. They're just big fans of the product, and so they're not going to be very critical about any step of it. Or it could be there's some popularity with the approach. Ford recently announced it's going to look at going to fixed prices for EVs instead of negotiated prices, possibly in reaction to this feedback from buyers. They don't really like the uncertainty about prices and the suspicion they perhaps got a bad deal. It looked like, in this analysis, people were more happy with the direct sales model than with negotiated dealership experience. Post-delivery, it did not appear that the dealership model offered a greater satisfaction there. Looking at by brand, BMW did quite well. As might be expected, Tesla did very well on dealership knowledge and support. BMW did very well on dealership knowledge and also support overall. These were the top 6 automakers by vehicle brand. We looked at, we wondered if Tesla service had issues geographically. We had heard that due to the large number of Teslas in California, their service wasn't as good there. That's anecdotal, but we thought we'd check it out based on our sample and the survey. Overall satisfaction is still quite high, but yes, there was slightly higher dissatisfaction in California than the rest of the survey for Tesla's support and service systems. Again, it might not be as high as our anecdotal evidence suggested, that dissatisfaction level, but there could be a selection bias in who chose to take our survey and got this far into it. Compared to the prior survey, most of the top-level findings are very consistent. The motivating factors, the role of economic incentives, the role of renewable energy, the utilization of workplace charging, and the demographics are all pretty similar. We added new questions on the post-sales service experience and on the model year of the vehicle to parse out the satisfaction by the age of the vehicles. And that public charging concern of increased significance raised a lot of questions. Are these problems objectively more severe? Is it the perception of problems has increased? And the report notes multiple recent articles speaking about the problems of public charging, but just today there was a new one in The Atlantic. And a couple of weeks ago, there was a video blog from Electrify America's CEO noting that, in his experience, it had some hiccups. It wasn't abysmal. It had some hiccups that could be fixed. But there's definitely been attention on public charging problems. It's also possible that the shifting market to more mainstream adopters decreased satisfaction, that the early adopters were more willing to put up with these hiccups. I didn't see that in a short evaluation of that data, except for Tesla drivers, where the newer ones were less forgiving of system flaws. And then I wondered if there was more use of public charging in 2022 compared to 2021. As pandemic restrictions eased, people doing more road trips. I don't know about that, but it was a possible explanation. So there's several different reasons why our survey might have seen increased perception of public charging difficulties. Again, everything in the survey is driver perception. It's not objective evaluation in any way. Let me just go back up to one metric that shows that. We asked about cargo space in the vehicles, and the one rated most exceptional by its drivers was Tesla Model Y, not the Model X, which is much larger. So this is relative to expectations. You consider your vehicle exceptional in all cases. And that kind of illustrates the data we're getting from our survey and how it differs from other kinds of analyses. This is not, we went to all the charges and found that 54% weren't working. That's not what we did. we asked drivers if they felt it was satisfactory, and that's what they told us. So here, the floor report is available later today, the recording of the webinar, and I think we have a lot of time for Q&A. So let's begin.
We do. Thank you so much, Pete. So we have a lot of questions coming in, and we still have ourselves looking at the back end. So feel free to continue to send them in. A first question, was there a distinction in the survey between e-bike and an electric motorcycle?
No, we asked about two-wheeled electric vehicles, I believe.
Okay. And are there any more details or understanding about why 20% of EV drivers solely use or choose to only use level 1 at home for charging?
We did not ask about that, but I could answer that, as an EV driver myself, putting the level 2 charger does cost some money. It costs, in my case, around $1,200. And if you don't drive a lot, level 1 can meet your driving needs just fine. It can restore 30 to 40 miles of range overnight. For many EV drivers, that's all they need. It covers your daily driving. With a big enough battery, you can do longer trips once in a while, or use public charging if you have to. So I would say just having that option. Everyone has level 1 charging available to them. It's just a regular 120 volt outlet within a cord's length of your parking spot. So that would be my guess.
Yes.
I will add from that point of view, I always make the note that there's probably over 1 billion EV chargers in this country if you look at 120 volt outlets within range of a parking spot.
Yes. A lot of intenders or people who don't know about EVs think that they need really big range when in fact their daily commutes are not that long. Next question. Was the survey able to capture any information about household mobility fleets, like how many vehicles within a household and how many were EV versus gas powered, and whether the purchase of an EV resulted in a house giving up additional cars in their household?
I don't think we captured the net change in a household, but we did capture the total number of vehicles in a household by type. And I think something like 30% had only EVs and no gasoline vehicles, while the rest had some combination.
Yes. And were we able to look at attitudes based on geography and do a breakdown of rural, exurban, suburban, and urban?
No, we did not have, we did have zip code level data, but we just aggregated into state level information. We did not disaggregate into rural, urban, exurban, nor did we have daily driving distance. So
Yes.
there was always concerns about extending the survey too far and having too many questions. So we need to be judicious in what we add, but that's certainly an area of interest.
Yes, something that is on our radar for sure. And okay,
I see a couple in Q&A here I can answer quickly.
go for it.
Why is Toyota missing from your survey? I assume this means the dealership knowledge here. They weren't in the top 6. And for reasons of graph legibility, I cut this off at the top 6 brands dealerships. Toyota does have EVs. Top, they did have EVs in the sample. They were 5th here, but not for what dealership you shopped at, I guess. Interestingly, what did make it in Toyota's place? Yeah, we asked separately what dealership you shopped at and what's the brand of your car. And I guess Tesla, Chevy, Nissan, Ford, Kia, BMW. Tesla, Chevy, Nissan. So Kia made it into the top 6 for the dealership question. But I guess a lot of Toyota drivers didn't answer that question. And that's why it got bumped in favor of Kia. A good answer, good question though. I hadn't noticed that difference. So the top 5 website info sources. So I didn't mean to imply that Plug in America does all of these. I meant to imply that of the top 5 categories of information sources, Plug in America provides 3 of those categories. EV specific websites and forums, they have that. Nonprofit organizations, they have that. Ride and drive events, they do that. And then the other services, would be YouTube, of course, does video reviews, but other sites do too. Inside EVs has a number of those and things like that. Right. Pitch me the next question, Lindsay.
Sure. So we have Rap here, who says he's used Electrify America chargers and has experienced little to no problem. Is it possible that the criticisms that we see on the internet and articles are purely subjective?
Yes, absolutely possible that it's subjective. And note that majority of people didn't think that, or actually, majority of people didn't think that they were too much of a problem. 54% were generally satisfied, 46% were not. So, even these numbers, while they are much larger than last year's, don't represent an overall majority of people having such issues. And I think Electromedica's specific responses did a bit better than public DC fast chargers overall. That's in the report.
Okay. And were there any questions regarding expectations of who should provide publicly available charging stations? Should it be private commercial developers, municipal governments, different types of buildings or development types?
We did not have that question asked. Open-ended, I guess that could be multiple choice. Open-ended questions are pretty difficult to interpret the answers to. That could be a future question. But I think people are more interested in the satisfaction of their experience using it rather than how it gets done. They want the chargers and they want the chargers to be available and functioning. They're not terribly picky about who funds it, I think.
Yes. And we have Jay here asking, will the presentation be provided after the webinar? And yes, we will put it on pluginamerica.org/survey along with a recording of this webinar, and the full report will be available for download as a PDF. Moving on. Do we have any information on how many people were surveyed in each state? If so, can we share that information?
Yes, that is in the report. California was the largest. I think it was around 40% of responses, which enables separating out California for some analysis. I didn't parse Washington and Oregon separately, even though they have a lot of EVs, because they just have a much smaller number of responses. And so there'd be more error interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
But in the report, it does have the gross number of responses from each state.
Yes. And then Elliot says the Kia EV6 is relatively new and it was highly rated in one of the main categories. Any sense at this stage about owner satisfaction?
Yeah, I think if you look across all of the metrics for the EV6, it did quite well. I don't know if that off the top of my head, but I believe it did pretty well in most categories.
Okay. And again, just a reminder that some of this is, this landscape is changing pretty quickly, and we are trying to capture it the best that we can. And our data is a snapshot at a current moment, and this is why we are continuing this important work so that we can enhance the driver experience and the customer experience when purchasing a vehicle. Someone is asking if there's a way to find specific brand/model information. And yes, there is. Plug-in America actually created a comparison tool just for this purpose. It is plugstar.com. And there you can compare different vehicles, find something that fits your needs. And we encourage everyone to go check it out to get a feel for range and price. And of course, pricing will vary depending on where you live and, interest rates and all that sort of thing. So it is a good tool to get an idea and not an exact amount. Okay. We are getting some questions about EV, technical aspects of EV. So if you're using the level 1 at-home chargers for a long period of time consistently for say more than a year, will that affect the charging capacity of the battery in the long run? meaning specifically the battery won't be charged to the fullest capacity when taken to a level 3 charger later.
I don't believe that's the case. I hadn't heard that. I know certainly many plug-in hybrids only used level 1 in many cases, and many of our drivers also use only level 1. I hadn't heard about the impacting battery capacity. That sounds like a relic of old nickel metal hydride battery issues with not charging to the full capacity meant you would lock out some of that capacity, which I don't believe is an issue with lithium ion, or I hadn't heard there was.
Okay. We have a question from Howard. Do we get involved at all to educate prospective buyers that are interested in cost savings? The DC fast chargers are more expensive versus charging costs at home. And yes, we are actually working to educate buyers on that, and also advocating for everyone, especially those who live in multifamily housing, to have access to charging. Ingrid, do you want to add on to that and talk a little bit about the policy work that we're doing?
Sorry, Lindsay, I was just going through the questions. Could you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Can you just tell people about the Charging for All initiative and how we are trying to not only educate people about saving at home with charging costs instead of doing DC fast charging, but also advocating so that everyone has access to that lower cost of charging?
Sure. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for the question. Absolutely. Plug-in America is very focused on equity. And as you can see from these survey results, there and the demographics that more affluent people are most likely to drive an electric vehicle now. And we would like to see that change, because some of the wonderful benefits of electric vehicles, air quality improvements, more consistent fueling costs, gas prices, as you saw last year, can be all over the place, whereas electric prices stay pretty stable if you're charging at home. So we definitely want to see everyone have access to electric vehicles. And currently, if you have home charging, you're likely to pay somewhere around 15 cents per kilowatt hour to charge your EV. If you do not have home charging, you're likely to pay 3 times that. So it's sort of, if you live in a single family home and have access to a private charger, it's like paying $3 a gallon of gas equivalent. Whereas if you have to charge publicly, it's like paying $9. So this is a major equity issue. And we are working to address this in a number of ways to get more slower chargers. Fast chargers are great, but getting a lot of level 2 and even level 1 chargers in cities is really going to be important for people living in multifamily housing. So it's definitely one of our initiatives. We're also working on building codes so that when they put up new multifamily housing units, that every unit will have access to an outlet of some sort for EV charging. So definitely something we're very aware of, and we will explore that more in future surveys, and we will continue to work to make sure EVs are accessible to everyone. Thanks, Lindsay.
That's great. Thank you. Has someone compared satisfaction with the availability of public chargers with actual availability of chargers per EVs owned in a particular area? And this person is asking because anecdotally, there seems to be a lot more competition for public chargers in their area compared to 3 years ago.
Well, we did ask about chargers per location, satisfaction with that, as opposed to number of charging stations. And that kind of gets at the crowding issue. And we noted that it was higher in California, the concerns about overcrowding at the charging stations because there weren't enough chargers per EVs owned. So we can kind of derive that from our information, but we wouldn't explicitly ask that.
Yes. And then were there any questions about driver sentiment around level 2 infrastructure? Did drivers feel that there were enough public level 2 charging?
We didn't ask about that. We asked about the DC fast chargers, again, trying to keep things constrained and not too long a survey. And we felt that DC fast charging is more essential for road trips. And if, DC fast charger isn't working, you're stranded, potentially. And if the level 2 charger isn't working well, that's more of a convenience than a necessity, depending on your use case.
Yes, okay, and we have time for 2 more questions as we wrap this up. Do you have any information on people who purchased an EV and then bought a gas-powered vehicle as their next vehicle, and why? Is there a demographic or geographic aspect to this?
We did not have that information. You could speculate it might be just what they needed in the vehicle. If they needed a truck that could haul a trailer to the mountain lakes, right now there isn't an EV that can really do that reliably. So it could be just what they needed the vehicle to do, but I don't have that information.
Yes, and then what trends do you see over the years, or what trends have you seen over the years that you've been conducting the survey? Are there more brands selling EVs? Is there higher adoption?
Yeah, we could look at vehicle trends. There's some vehicle trend information here, slight changes. And we don't know if that's a change in who's taken the survey this year or which ones are on the market. We could look at who reported getting the vehicle in 2022, what brands those were. I think I did look at that. And there was a lot of the Kia and the Hyundai and the Mustang showed up as very common ones for the new acquisitions. But some change would just be who has had an EV since 2018 and has chosen to take the survey this year than before. So that's a possibility.
Okay, and then just to wrap us up, one final question. Len here says, many of us are EV advocates. Can we use your presentation slides to share to advance that effort? And the answer is, of course, we would love that. Again, all of the information will be on pluginamerica.org/survey shortly after the webinar. It will not happen immediately, but check back in 30 minutes or so for at least the full report. We will get the recording up when we can and the slides up as well. No later than at the end of today. We want to thank you all for being with us. There were so many great questions that we were not able to get to, and we appreciate you sending them in. And we're so grateful that you chose to spend time with us today to learn more about the EV landscape.